coming up.
It was a relief in one way, but really emotional otherwise, because she's my sister.
For Vault Studios, I'm Will Johnson. You're listening to The Daily Crime. On June 3rd, 1993, the body of a woman was found on the side of a road just on the outskirts of Gilroy, California.
There was nothing left except bones.
Cause of her death was listed as undetermined. Now, decades later, investigators have identified the victim and her killer.
It's just a really hard pill to swallow to know that she was laying there and also that she was unidentified for so long.
It's exciting and sad at the same time, and a relief to finally have an answer.
This case is really unique because it's not often that you have a conviction for murder without knowing who the victim is.
Why put off having fun until you finally have that free time you keep hearing about? You already do enough to earn a bit of joy exactly when you want it. With Best Fiends, you can have a little fiendish fun anytime, anywhere with an exciting mobile puzzle adventure game. It's easy to pick up and play, whether it's for a few minutes here and there, or if that free time does roll around, you can have a fiend-tastic marathon. With thousands of exciting levels and new events year-round, Best Fiends is a fresh adventure every time you play. And you'll never be stranded without fun because you can play without an internet connection. There are dozens of unique characters. As you collect more of them, you'll customize your team to beat every challenging puzzle that comes your way. You can even level up your characters as you progress throughout the game. You've earned your fun time. Download Best Fiends free on the App Store or Google Play. Plus, get $5 of in-game rewards when you reach level 5. That's Best Fiends on the App Store or Google Play. Friends without the R. Best Fiends.
And I'm joined by Katherine Cook, a reporter at KGW in Portland, Oregon. Katherine, thanks for being here with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Will.
Katherine, let's just talk through this case a little bit and what we knew about not a whole lot of information back in 1993 when a body was found on the side of the road, right?
Yeah, things have changed a lot, especially with technology. When this woman, who we now know was Patricia Skipple, was discovered, it was out in Gilroy, on the outskirts of Gilroy off Highway 152. And that area is also known as Pacheco Pass. And she was wearing a blue dress at the time. And that's how they gave her the nickname Blue Pacheco. Because at that point, they had no idea who this woman, this victim, was. They didn't know her name. Her remains had been out there for too long to recognize her. So at that point, they just knew she was a victim of a homicide. And then several years later, they got a letter. Santa Clara County officials got a letter from the man that we know as the Happy Face Killer, also known as Keith Jesperson. And he basically confessed to killing the woman whose body was found on the side of the road. But still, they didn't know her name. So then fast forward many, many, many years later, the cold case unit out of Santa Clara County was still diligently trying to crack this and other cases. And now we have DNA technology. So we have a relative of Patricia Skipple, who was from Oregon, get a DNA test kit for Christmas. These are pretty popular, right? A lot of people want to find connections with family. Well, unbeknownst to him, he was about to help investigators crack this decades-old case. And they reached out to him and said, hey, we noticed you have some, a DNA that we'd like to investigate, but we're not, they didn't tell him why. That's the funny part. And he had to chuckle. He's like, here he is. He's just, uploading his DNA for hobby purposes. And then he gets this call from a random sheriff's office in California. And, he hesitated at first, he said, but he's like, okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and post my DNA on gedmatch.com, which is a public DNA database that law enforcement can access.
They were searching, for some answers, They didn't tell me why. So I was a little bit hesitant about doing it. It's just that detectives were doing some research and they wanted my DNA. And I was going, wow, I wonder what that's all about,
And so when they did that, they grabbed his DNA, and his sister actually did the same thing. The victim's niece and nephew. And then, not long after that, they connected the dots. They reached back out and said, hey, we know what happened to your Aunt Patricia Skipple. She was murdered by the Happy Face Killer, Keith Jesperson.
So this body that was found decades ago, a long time ago, is eventually identified. And that comes after they knew that she was a victim of the Happy Face Killer. But then finally this recent news. And for anyone who gets this kind of information after that long, it must have just been mind-blowing. I know you talked to family members a little bit, the victim's brother and also sister, right?
Correct. Yeah. And it was a huge relief for both of them. The victim's nephew, Don Benton, was one of the gentlemen I spoke with. He is one of the people whose DNA came up as a match on the profiles as related to Patricia Skipple. So, knowing that, his aunt had been positively identified as a victim and they knew what happened to her, and knowing that somehow something he did helped solve that case, even if he didn't realize it at the time, it was sad, but also satisfying. And, it's always good when families can have closure, even if it's not the outcome that they had been hoping for all of these years.
Katherine, I know in your neck of the woods there in Oregon, the name and the moniker, the Happy Face Killer, is well known in other parts of the country as well, because he was a serial killer who was operating and killed more than just a few women over a period of time.
Absolutely. For what we know, Keith Jesperson has confessed to killing 8 women between 1990 and 1995. And, not only in Oregon, but also California, Washington, Florida, Nebraska, and Wyoming. And he's serving several life sentences without the possibility of parole here in Oregon for those crimes. But at other points, he has said that he has killed other people, but those cases have not, been able to be confirmed. So we can safely say at least 8 people.
You mentioned the relief the family members felt, but it also just must be such a disturbing and chilling thought to think that that she was the victim of someone who was a known serial killer.
That's right. And, her sister, Gloria White, who also got the news, lives here in Oregon. And she described it to me as just a really hard pill to swallow, knowing that her sister was killed by a serial killer, but also that her remains were left lying by the side of the road for so long. It's extremely difficult and painful to comprehend those details. But again, she too was so grateful. And a note about the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office officials who were on this case, they boarded a plane, flew to Oregon, and told Patricia Skipple's relatives in person that they had cracked this case. And the relatives I spoke with said that meant a lot to them. It showed the care and the commitment that this team of investigators had, and that they really wanted to see this through truly to the very end.
Yeah, I was struck by that detail as well, the fact that they boarded a plane and didn't just pick up the phone and made this in-person visit.
Yeah, it was a detail that I think was also incredibly satisfying for the investigators too, because when you think about it, this has been, on their plate for decades, and they become incredibly close and connected to it as well. So to be able to deliver that news was, I'm sure, very emotional. I know it was very emotional for them. They shared that much during a news conference.
It was very moving to be able to meet with them and give them those answers that they deserve. And there's many more John and Jane Does who deserve to get their name back.
And they all worked hard to find the answer, and never gave up. That's the biggest thing about it, is they never gave up,
And Katherine, one final question you mentioned in your on-air reporting, but this is a case where, they eventually identified the victim, but when the Happy Face Killer, Keith Hunter Jesperson, was actually, I assume, convicted of this murder, they still didn't know who she was, and that's relatively uncommon to have a victim who's unidentified.
That's correct. The sheriff's officials shared that much. It's very unusual to have someone confess to killing somebody and then be convicted of that crime and yet not know the victim's identity. Certainly, though, that makes sense if this is decades ago and the remains were found, hundreds of miles and a state away from where the victim went missing.
All right. Katherine Cook, thanks so much for talking to us. Katherine Cook at KGW in Portland, Oregon. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Will.
You've been listening to The Daily Crime, a podcast from Vault Studios. Be sure to check out our other podcasts, including Bardstown, The Officer's Wife, and our weekly show, True Crime Chronicles. For Vault Studios, I'm Will Johnson.